الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لم تقولون ما لا تفعلون كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون. إن الله يحب الذين يقاتلون في سبيله صفا كأنهم بنيان مرصوص. وإذ قال موسى لقومه يا قوم لم تؤذونني وقد تعلمون أني رسول الله إليكم فلما زاغوا أزاغ الله قلوبهم والله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين. وإذ قال عيسى ابن مريم يا بني إسرائيل إني رسول الله إليكم مصدقا لما بين يدي من التوراة ومبشرا برسول يأتي من بعد اسمه أحمد. فلما جاءهم بالبينات قالوا هذا سحر مبين. ومن أظلم ممن افترى على الله الكذب وهو يدعى إلى الإسلام والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. يريدون ليطفئوا نور الله بأفواههم والله متم نوره ولو كره الكافرون. هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا هل أدلكم على تجارة تنجيكم من عذاب أليم تؤمنون بالله ورسوله وتجاهدون في سبيل الله بأموالكم وأنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. يغفر لكم ذنوبكم ويدخلكم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ومساكن طيبة في جنات عدن ذلك الفوز العظيم. وأخرى تحبونها نصر من الله وفتح قريب وبشر المؤمنين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا أنصار الله كما قال عيسى ابن مريم للحواريين من أنصاري إلى الله قال الحواريون نحن أنصار الله. فآمنت طائفة من بني إسرائيل وكفرت طائفة فأيدنا الذين آمنوا على عدوهم فأصبحوا ظاهرين. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وہ دن نہ ملیں گے، وہ مقدر نہ ملے گا، وہ دن نہ ملیں گے، وہ مقدر نہ ملے گا. کعبے کی قسم اب کوئی حیدر نہ ملے گا. مل جائیں گی ایران مصر و روم کی راہیں، مل جائیں گی ایران مصر و روم کی راہیں. دیوار کو کعبے کی مگر در نہ ملے گا، وہ دن نہ ملیں گے. پر محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
کون قائل تھا سلامی کہ جنا اور بھی ہے، کون قائل تھا سلامی کہ جنا اور بھی ہے. کربلا دیکھی تو ہم سمجھے کہ ہاں اور بھی ہے، کون قائل تھا سلامی کہ جنا اور بھی ہے. صدقے اس دل کے جو ہو حب علی سے آباد، صدقے اس دل کے جو ہو حب علی سے آباد، اس سے بہتر کوئی دنیا میں مکان اور بھی ہے. کون قائل تھا سلامی کے جنا اور بھی ہے. برچھیاں مار کے اکبر کو پکارے آدھا، برچھیاں مار کے اکبر کو پکارے آدھا. شہ سے پوچھو کوئی فرزند جوان اور بھی ہے، کون قائل تھا سلامی کے جنا اور بھی ہے. فلک پیر تجھے شہ کی ضعیفی کی قسم، فلک پیر تجھے شہ کی ضعیفی کی قسم. علی اکبر سا زمانے میں جوان اور بھی ہے، کون قائل تھا سلامی کے جنا اور بھی ہے. اپنے فرزندوں کے مرنے پہ بھی گریہ نہ کیا، अपने फर्जंदों के मरने पे भी गिरिया ना किया। दहर में ज़ैनब मज़लूम सी और भी है। कौन कायल था सलामी के जिना और भी है। शह से ज़ैनब ने कहा तुम जो हो मुश्ताक़ क़ज़ा। शह से ज़ैनब ने कहा तुम जो हो मुश्ताक़ क़ज़ा। मेरी अम्मा का कोई फातिहा ख़ार भी है। कौन कायल था सलामी के जिना और भी है। लाश पामाल सरे शाम जो होते हैं नज़ीर। लाश पामाल सरे शाम जो होते हैं नज़ीर। बाग़ ज़हरा पे सितम बाद ख़िज़ा और भी है। कौन कायल था सलामी के जिना और भी है। करबला देखी तो हम समझे के हाँ और भी है। पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Ahsantum, jazakumullah khair al-jazaa. Thank you very much for a very moving mafia. So now is the time for Samahat Sheikh Jaffer Ladak's lecture. Just a few housekeeping points just before we start. Number one, volunteers are in yellow, so if you have any problems, needs, concerns, water, anything at all, just find the volunteer upstairs or downstairs in yellow. Here, Sister Jinan is in yellow, and for any ladies that want to do blood donation, of course, there's a blood donation campaign going on, please. And men, of course. Come see Jinan. So if you want to donate blood in the month of Muharram and to remember the sacrifice of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, please grab a volunteer, or particularly Jinan, and we'll get you signed up. The other thing is, I have noticed a lot of phones have come out during the majalis, and also, ashamed to say, people have been playing games. I've spotted them with my own eyes. So as a courtesy point to the Sheikh, if you're in majlis, listen to majlis. If you have a pressing message or phone call, of course, please take it, but by no means play games. And that's, I've seen older and younger people play this, so this is to us all. No games in the majalis. Never thought I'd say that. The other thing is, don't forget there are toilets upstairs, so if you need to do a wudu later, there's a toilet upstairs. You don't have to use the downstairs toilet. And there will be enough food tonight for everybody. I understand yesterday there was a shortage. Please only take one container of food. Some people may have been taking more than one. Please only take one. It is tabarak for you all, so please only take one. With that, we are very honoured and pleased to have with us Samahat Sheikh Jaffer Ladak, continuing his series plotting the course of a successful Shia community. Today, Sheikh is talking about your identity, your strength. Afterwards, there is Salat Maghribain and a Q&A here afterwards. So don't forget, you can join us for continual discussions. With that, we beg Samahat Sheikh welcome with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Also, would the gentlemen like to just come further, closer to the Sheikh, because some people do come a little bit late. So please come fully forward to embrace the majlis. Ladies, I'll close the curtain as well a little bit for you all. A little bit more, gentlemen. Really enjoy the splendor of Samahat Sheikh.
Very wrong.
Remember to speak, I think, yeah?
That part wasn't live streamed.
Of course, but I said it, not you.
For the love of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, Allahumma salli ala. And for the love of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Aba Abdillah al-Hussein, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, Allahumma salli. And for the awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, Allahumma salli ala. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولله ملك السماوات والأرض ويوم تقوم الساعة يومئذ يخسر المبطلون وترى كل أمة جاثية كل أمة تدعى إلى كتابها اليوم تجزون ما كنتم تعملون هذا كتابنا ينطق عليكم بالحق إنا كنا نستنسخ ما كنتم تعملون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي Abdillah al-Hussein صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. If you were to be asked the question, what is the Shia community of Leeds most known for, what would be your answer? If the Shia community of Leeds could be identified with a particular feature or characteristic or a particular participation in the city, what do you think the ordinary individual would be able to identify us with? It may be that you and I are unable to find a definitive answer, or it may be that we can say that we have accomplished certain things and we are well known in this sphere. This is something that we need to be able to explore tonight in terms of one of the aspects of how our communities can go forward. So far in our series, we have looked at the following matters. Number one, that on the Day of Judgment, Allah Jalla Jalaluhu will raise our communities together. From one perspective, it could be the Baab community, the Dar community. From another, the Leeds community, the Shia community will be raised together on the Day of Judgment. And we will be asked about what we achieved with the resources that we were given collectively. Number two, we've spoken about the core feature of a Shia community, and that is social wilaya, that we look after one another with a level of guardianship that is befitting of Shia looking after Shia. The Quran mentions يُحِبُّونَ مَنْ هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِمْ. We should love one another. وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. And that we should prefer the other over our own selves. Yesterday, we started looking at another topic, asking ourselves about a key feature of our own community. And that is whether we know our history, our present, and the direction of our future. The hadith that we cited last night from the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, states, Rahimallahu imra'an arifa. May Allah have mercy upon the one who knows where he is from, where he is situated now, and where he is going to. And we talked about the importance of knowing our own histories as communities, how we have arrived here, the importance of knowing how to ponder upon our own community strengths as well as weaknesses. The question of the night last night was, what are the gaps that need filling in our communities? What are the areas that we need to be able to support ourselves with? And also, where are we going? If we could have something like a census about the Leeds Shia community, we would know how many people are in our communities. We would know where they live. We would know the median income of our communities. We would know whether we are a growing community or a shrinking community. And thus we would know where we need to plot ourselves over the coming decades. This is something that we needed to think about until yesterday. Tonight's conversation, inshallah, is entitled Your Identity, Your Strength. We have many challenges when it comes to our identity. And we need to talk about it from two perspectives: the individual identity, but also the collective identity that our Shia community has. And so at times we're going to talk about our individual selves and how we identify ourselves in Islam, the recommendations, and also the collective of ourselves and how we have a collective identity, which goes back to the first question that I asked tonight. If you could say that our Shia community in Leeds is known for one thing, what would it be? Is it that we feed the homeless, for example? Is it that we rehouse the homeless, for example? Is it that we are known for our conservation and our environmental principles? Is it that we are known that our mosques and Husayniyat welcome other communities? Is it that others regularly can visit us? Is it, for example, that schools, when they want to teach religious education, they regularly come to our Husayniyat and Masajid? Is it that we're known for our interfaith dialogue or intra-faith dialogue? What is it that the Shia community of Leeds is known for? That if someone was coming from the outside and asking you, what are the main accomplishments of your community that you've been here for 20 or 30 years, what would be those things that you and I could point to? If you look at the ahadith of Ahlulbayt alayhimus salam, they ask us to be identified with certain features. And what you'll find throughout tonight's discussion is this key point, is that the way in which Ahlulbayt alayhimussalam asked us to be identifying ourselves and to be identified by others is very different to the way in which we are succumbing to the ideas of how we identify ourselves. Go online, for example, and you'll see many of our youth, may Allah bless them, in their innocence and their love for Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam. It is more important to be tagged with 313, for example. It is more important to have a big heavy chain of a Zulfiqar and you walk around with the shirt open and people get to see that you are a Shia. Or maybe we have an alam outside our house. Is this what Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam asked for you in terms of how you are identified? But this has become the trend. This is more important that I'm identified in this way, but the way Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam demanded it is completely forgotten. And so tonight what I want you to think about is this as well. The way in which we are known as a community, the way we are known as individuals, and whether that matches with the demands of Ahlul Bayt and the Holy Quran upon us. Let us start with some challenges. On some reflection, I will humbly suggest that there are maybe 5 challenges that we face when it comes to our identity, saying who we are with pride, being able to display ourselves with the types of characteristics that we want to be identified with. Some of them are inherited challenges, and some of those are thrusted upon us by the outside world. Now it may be that you face none of these 5 challenges, and it may be that you face 2 of them. And it may be that some of the youth face particular ones and our elders face different ones of those. So it's important for you to try to pinpoint where you feel some of these challenges lie when it comes to who you are and how you identify yourself. As an example, one challenge. One of the gravest challenges comes to us from our histories. And by priority, the British Empire and the way in which the British Empire carved up much of the world and wanted to impose upon peoples new identities so that they could easily be divided and conquered. You'll know that there's a famous saying that the British Empire was so vast, there was not a time that the sun set on the British Empire from one side of the globe to the other. So we're talking about spanning all the way from parts of the Far East, all the way across Asia, parts of Africa, even to America before its independence. That's how vast the British Empire was at its peak. There's a very good book by an Indian scholar by the name of Shashi Tharoor, who has written a book called The Dark Ages. And this book details the history of what the British Empire imposed upon India and how it destroyed it from being one of the wealthiest nations, the most productive and forward nations in the world, to destroying it and completely pillaging it until the time of, let's say, at least its independence. And in his book, he actually goes through something very important. He says that prior to the British, Indian societies, Indian communities were largely homogeneous. They lived together in very blurred lines. What do I mean by blurred lines? Or what does he mean by blurred lines? That although you had your religion and your sect and your languages, which were all very different. You know, in India there is 1,000 languages. You can't travel a couple of miles without a new dialect being spoken. That's how vast this country is, how phenomenal this country is. But communities tended to live in blurred communities, meaning that they very much mixed and coordinated with each other and tended not to identify themselves primarily through division, but cohesion. When the British came along, they created the census and they wanted to be able to divide and conquer. And the best way to divide and conquer a people is to make sure that you feel you are different to the other person. That you feel that that person is somehow different to you, and thus it's easy to sow discord between yourselves. And so they forced every person to identify themselves through a census, but go as minute as possible. So you have to identify differently from the neighbor that is situated next to you. Shashi Tharoor mentions it went so far, and I want you to understand how easy it is to divide and conquer us, and how much we as a Muslim community lost out because of that. Listen to this. This is in his book. Anyone who wants a copy, I'll bring it for you tomorrow. You can see it for yourself. This is an Indian, a Hindu man telling the Muslim community that before the British Empire, Muslims of all sects used to gather in the 10 days of Muharram and commemorate the martyrdom anniversary of Aba Abdillah al-Hussein salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Sunni, Shia, Salafi, Sufi under one banner, weeping over Hussein salamullahi alayhi. The British came in and said, no, you can't be in the same masjid. You're a Sunni, you're a Shia. You're not supposed to like one another. Have your own mosques. You're a Shia. You're supposed to speak out against the Khulafa and curse them. You're a Sunni. You're supposed to love these companions more than Ahlulbayt alayhimus salam. And what happened? Slowly, year after year, decade after decade, Shias became more extreme in their spoken languages. Sunnis became more extreme in their identification with themselves, until they no longer started commemorating Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam together. Eventually it got to the point where Sunnis were told that it's bad, it's a bid'ah to cry over Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. That of course came from occupied Arabia, Al Saud, la'natullahi alayhim ajma'een, and as a result eventually our Sunni brethren stopped reciting the maqtal of Imam altogether. Imagine if we had kept hold of that unity and not been so easily gullible and divided. So sometimes the problem with identities is that they are placed upon you historically, and we don't realize that we've inherited division. Now where else has this come about? Not just in India, it's come in the Middle East. We're supposed to be one ummah, one Muslim ummah. Now you have every single country, all of the Arab nations divided into states fighting with one another, having to buy weapons from the West to kill one another. Imagine where we've got to. The flags that these Arab countries have that they wave and kiss and everything else, they're created for them by the English and the French. They don't even have their own flags, they were given to them by the French. But they hold on to these forms of identification so strongly as if this is what matters in life. And now we're willing to kill one another, fellow Muslims, over these things. Think about it. Think about it carefully. When you identify with something, is it something that your religion has told you to identify with? Or is it something that was socially created to tell you that you should identify in this way? And that this is more important than any other identification. Just think about it very carefully. I'm not saying you can't identify with your nation or you can't identify with your culture or the community. Do. But just think about your priorities and where those things have come from. Tomorrow that same nation can go. The border will be wiped out. The flag will be gone. How many communities have passed? Kam ahlakna min al-qurun. How many communities have we destroyed, the Quran asks. Do you think that that identity is going to remain forever? But how many people hold on to it with dear life, putting everything else behind it? Number one, the first problem is inherited. Number two, the second problem is sometimes we are made to fear our own identities. And so we don't want to express ourselves. You may know, in this country, The government over the last several years has created a policy known as the PREVENT strategy. Hands up, how many of you have heard of PREVENT? Hands up. Many of you. I'm sure those of you in especially professional services, you have to be trained on PREVENT. Now it's a longer conversation, but simply this: the government, wanting to stop extremism in the Muslim community in this country, basically created an idea that said, if you are presenting yourself in a way that is religiously conservative, it could be that you are seen as on a conveyor belt towards extremism. So if you wear hijab, if you have a beard, if you want to wear a dishdasha on Friday, if you want to go on ziyarah, if you speak about international policies, if you speak about the issues of jihad, if you speak about all of this, could be a tool to identify that you are an extremist. And as an outcome, many a Muslim has been scared from speaking about their own faith or representing their own faith out of fear that they're going to be called an extremist. I remember in one community, one of the youth came to me from madrasa and said to me that in their own school, because of the pressures that they are being faced against them about how they speak, about how they identify themselves, that in RE class, even when they are taught, where people are taught in that class about Islam, Muslims are afraid to identify as Muslims, and there's so many jokes made about Muslims that they are afraid to identify as Muslims. He gave me an example. He said, for example, in RE, in religious education, when they are taught, for example, about the adhan, Allahu Akbar, kids would sit behind him and make an explosion sound, boom! Because, as you know, nowadays, they mix up the takbir with a suicide bomber exploding their own. So he was now afraid to even identify with the takbir of Allahu Akbar. Second challenge is what? Is we are made to fear our own identities at times. This is a second example. A third example is very pertinent to some of our communities here. And that is that over a number of generations, we start to lose the identities that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents held. In our communities here, some of you are going to be fourth generation migrants, depending on your age. So that first generation that moved here, for example, in the 60s or whenever, when they first put roots here, they were heavily holding on to their identity, and rightly so. For example, they would come here and say, we are proudly Iraqi. Or if you come here in the 80s, we are proudly Iraqi. Their children also identify as Iraqi. But once you go further and further down the generations, it might be that that child has never even visited Iraq, for example. Has never visited back home. And all they know about back home and what they're told that they're supposed to identify with is what they've heard from their previous generations. They may speak part of the language, but they don't know anything else about it. How then do they truly identify as being Pakistani or Iraqi or Irani, for example? And so you'll find a third challenge is over a period of generations, there's something lost. People don't know who they are. Their parents tell them, you are, mashallah, Pakistani, you are Khoja, but they don't know anything about what that means to them. And it's never been instilled, it's never been explained. No one has sat down with them and talked to them about what it means to identify with that community. All they're told is, you are this. But when they start thinking for themselves and they become 15, or when they go to university and someone challenges them and says, what about you makes you Khoja? What's he going to say? Kitumbua? What's he going to say? What's he going to say? Iraqi chai? What makes you this way? What makes you hold on to this identity? This is a third challenge that comes about. A fourth challenge that comes about is a very interesting one, and I know for sure my youth, my brothers and sisters are going through this challenge at the moment. The fourth challenge is that they will always make you jump through hoops and make you try to change your identity. Right now, the big thing is, what's your pronouns? right? Everyone has to have their, and how many people on their social media have to put his, her, him, they, who, hat, why, who? They don't know what it means. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know where it's come from, who created these questions, what the implications are of it. But hey, as long as I look cool, right? As long as I kind of, go with the flow, who cares of the implications or what community has tried to create these new structures and make me jump through these hoops? We also have a last problem, a fifth problem with the issue of identity. And this one I noticed on social media trending in the Muslim Twitter space about a week ago. And it really threw me because I had no idea about it. You may have seen it. There's a Muslim brother, may Allah bless him, in his innocence. He's being asked the question, right, tell me, who do you identify with most in the world? Who do you see as your leader in the world? May Allah bless him. Brother, beard's nice, speaks nice. He says, well, I'm a Muslim, so, I gotta say Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, right? Sorry, that was his answer. And then he goes, but if you really ask me, it's Andrew Tate. Now, some of you don't know who Andrew Tate is, and good on you. If you're like, who? Don't even waste your time with this guy. May Allah bless him. But if you know who I'm talking about, you know who I'm talking about. And if you know who I'm talking about, why do you know who I'm talking about? I didn't know. I'd actually seen something, his video, I'd seen him one place before, but I didn't know his name. So when this whole kerfuffle kicked off on Twitter and everyone's going, how can a Muslim, say his leader in one breath is Rasulullah, and at the same time Andrew Tate? I thought, actually this is important. We need to mention this. Think about this. What makes a Muslim brother in the same breath identify with Khatim al-Nabiyyin, Rahmatun lil Alameen, and in the same breath Andrew Tate? What has to happen to a person in their mind? What spaces are they in that puts these two, not equivalent, but as worthy of, anything? Andrew Tate is worthy of his time. But he identified with him. Why? You have to understand that these are some of the challenges. So 5 challenges that are presented here for you to be able to understand when people try to curate their identities, how they sometimes deal with these challenges. Now if you open your Qur'ans please to chapter number 17, verse number 1. Chapter number 17, verse number 1. Surah Al-Isra, verse number 1. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us with the primary identity the greatest of creation. Allah said this is how he is to be identified. And this is no ordinary event. This is the greatest event for someone to be invited to the highest level of heaven in his life and to reach closer to Allah, Kaaba Qawsaini aw adna, and still Allah says this is how he should be identified. What does it say about me and you? How should we identify ourselves? When we die, we are going to also be identified in exactly the same way. every one of us, when we are buried, someone is going to take our shoulders and shake us and say, Isma' ifham, ya fulan bin fulan. Khalas, that's it. Isma'i ifhami, ya fulana bin fulan. That's it. All of these identities, all the football teams that I identify with, all the nation states that everything, nothing is going to be carried with us. The angels are just going to identify you by your first name and the name of your father. That's it. That's it. How many do you want to carry with you through this life? And I tell you, the more you carry with you, the more confusing it becomes for us. As I said, because you're constantly jumping through hoops. But if your primary identity in life is in relation to Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, your proximity to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, not only will you never need any other identity, your strength will come from this relationship. Your identity as being my relationship to my Creator, and not all the socially created identities that everybody asks me to jump through hoops for. Not saying don't identify as Pakistani or Indian or Iraqi or Iranian or whatever. But remember, your primary identity is with Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. That's the primary identity, to the extent that even the Messenger himself was not given in this night an identity second to that. It was just the first identity. It's a wonderful story. One of our maraji, or at least if he's not marja, he was one of the most senior ayatollah of his time. Recently, passed away a decade ago or so, Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Rida Shirazi, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, wonderful soul. Once, narrated, he went to a conference. If I recall my story correctly, it could have been that he was in Switzerland or somewhere in Europe, doesn't matter where. It was a big conference of Shia and ulama had got together, and the ulama wanted to introduce themselves and say, this is me, this is you, let's get to meet each other, know one another, and so on and so forth. One of the ulama comes to him and introduces himself to Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Rida Shirazi. He says to him, I am such and such, my name, and I am the Imam of Jama'ah for this masjid. I am the head of this particular organization, and I founded this particular organization, and I got my master's degree from this particular university, and I'm doing my PhD from this particular university. What is your name? Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Rida Shirazi rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi responded, Ana Rida. My name is Rida. That's it. The humility of the individual was at the forefront of his identity. I don't need to present all my CV to you. This is who I am. And sometimes, when we hold on to more and more identities, before our Islamic identity, before our relation to Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, wallahi, thumma wallahi, they can be your downfall. I have seen, Allah is my witness, I have seen the most terrible of examples of people holding on to their identity more so than their Islam. I was in an SGM in Milton Keynes, not afraid to say it. I was in an SGM, a special general meeting in Milton Keynes. And one of the agenda items was to welcome the Afghani refugee Afghani community into Milton Keynes, KSIMC, Khoja, Shia, Ithna Ashari Muslim community in Milton Keynes, to welcome them into the community formally and to offer membership to allow them to be part of the community. When America invaded and occupied Afghanistan in the last war, many thousands of the Afghani community had to flee for many reasons, as you know, especially around the Taliban and the oppression and massacres that the American and British armies committed. Many of our Afghani brethren had to flee, and many came to Milton Keynes. For years, they would rent out the center from the Khoja community. eventually it got to the point where it was debated, should there be membership open for this community? When it was presented as the agenda item, after listening to the discussion points, the president stated, and I quote, "Over my dead body will the Afghani community be allowed to be members. We are a Hoja community exclusively, and they will not be allowed membership." All I can say is, till today, that story breaks my heart. A disgusting example of how identity is sometimes thrusted in front of Islam. The lack of regard in akhlaq, how easily people can get stuck within these shallow identities, thinking that these are more important than anything else. This is a refugee community that had struggled hard coming here. You know what they had to do? These are people who are now owning the taxi drivers, they're sometimes working in restaurants, not the most affluent community as a first generation migrant community. They had to go and buy their own center. Hundreds of thousands of pounds wasted because a social identity was more important than deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Till today it breaks my heart. Be very careful of the identities that you hold on to and the way in which you think that these identities are superior to your faith. Even the messenger himself, Allah only identified him as an abd. Now when it comes to the Shia community, Ahlulbayt alayhim wassalam have asked us to identify ourselves and be identified in a particular way. And it won't shock you. It's not titles. It certainly isn't titles. It isn't, he's Iraqi, he's this, he's that, he's Pakistani, he's got this big Zulfiqar hanging around his neck. The only thing Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam asked us to identify with was good features of our behaviors. He wanted us to identify ourselves and be identified outside by behaviors and characteristics. There's one hadith that is sahih, and it comes to us from Al-Kafi. The reason why I mention that is that from our most noble book of hadith, this particular hadith is sahih and comes to us from our sixth Imam Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. And I want you to see how the Imam says, I want you to be identified. I want you to be known by this. And compare it with what you see often until today. Imam alayhi salam says the following. Usikum, I give you a testimony here, a will for you, the Imam says. Usihim bitaqwallah, that you should have reverence of Allah, piety. Wal-wara'i fi dinihim, to have piety in your religion. Wal-ijtihadi lillah, and to struggle hard in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Was-sidq al-hadith, and to be truthful in your speech. Wa-ada' al-amana, and to return the trusts back to people. Wa-tul al-sujud, and to prolong and extend your sajda. وَحُسْنِ الْجَوَارِ, and to do good to your neighbors. فَبِهَذَا جَاءَ مُحَمَّدٌ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وَأَدُّ الْأَمَانَةَ إِلَى مَنِ ائْتَمَنَكُمْ عَلَيْهَا مِنْ بَرٍّ أَوْ فَاجِرٍ. For this is what the Prophet himself brought in his religion, to return the amanat to people that are due them, whether they are evil or whether they are good. Now Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam says something very important about our identities. Sallu fi asha'irihim, pray with their communities. Who is their communities? Who? Muslim communities. He didn't say pray amongst yourselves. He didn't say sallu fi ashairikum. Pray amongst yourselves, your communities. Sallu fi ashairihim, their communities. Meaning the Muslim masses. What today would be called Sunnis. Pray amongst their communities, with their communities. Washhadu janaizahum, and participate in their janazas. Wa'udu mardahum, and visit their sick folk. Wa'addu huquqahum, and return to them their rights. فَإِنَّ رَجُلَ مِنْكُمْ إِذَا وَرَعَ فِي دِينِهِ وَصَدَّقَ حَدِيثًا وَأَدَّى الْأَمَانَةَ وَحَسُنَ خُلْقُهُ مَعَ النَّاسِ. If one of you people was to do this, if you had to have piety in your religion, to have truthfulness in your speech, to return the amana, to have good akhlaq amongst people, قِيلَ, it would be said, هَذَا جَعْفَرِيٌّ, you would be identified as being a Ja'fari, a follower of the sixth Imam. فَيَسُرَّنِي ذَلِكَ, and that would please me greatly. The sixth Imam, Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, says, your identity according to the Imam was what? هَذَا جَعْفَرِيٌّ, but it was engulfed with qualities, good actions. That's how the Imam wanted you to be identified by priority. The Imam didn't forbid us being identified as Khoja or Pakistani or anything. But your first way that you should see each other and be identified by the outside world was on the qualities of your deeds. Now, if I am not identified through that, if my primary identity is something else, then it shows me my deeds are not at the forefront of whom I am. My akhlaq is not at the forefront of whom I am. Something else is at the forefront of whom I am. Jaffer is known first and foremost as a Spurs fan. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not such a bad thing. Jaffer is known for being polite. Jaffer is known for swearing. Jaffer is known for causing fitna on Twitter. What is Jaffer known for? The Imam says when you are known for these qualities, Sidq al-Hadith, Husn al-Khalq, Husn al-Jawar, you'll be identified as Ja'fari. وَهَذَا يَسُرُّنِي, it will make me greatly pleased. In fact, this hadith is also mentioned, the same hadith is mentioned by our 11th Imam alayhi salam, with slight differences in it. Now, I just want to expand on this point about the examples of the identity. And again, I'm presenting to you this book of Sifat al-Shia by Shaykh al-Saduq rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. I want to mention just one or two hadith for us to be able to think about. Look at this hadith from our sixth Imam Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Allahumma sallam. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam spoke to one of his companions, Mufaddal bin Qais. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam asked him a question about the number of Shia in the city of Kufa. Kufa is a big city, big Shia stronghold. Mufaddal bin Qais responds by saying, there are about 50,000 Shia in the city of Kufa. Big number. Imam responded by saying, do you hope that there are less Shia in Kufa? Just think about that. Imam is asking the companion, do you prefer it that there are less Shia or more Shia in Kufa? Of course, you would think that the Imam would want more Shia in Kufa. The Imam in the hadith begins to lower the number one by one. Would you prefer that there are 25,000, 10,000, 1,000 Shia in Kufa? Imam continues and he says, do you hope that there are 20 Shia in Kufa? The companion is confused. What do you mean? Why would I hope that there are 20? What the Imam was meaning by this is, I hope that we can reach 20 Shia in Kufa. You are identifying 50,000 Shia in Kufa. I, As-Sadiq alayhi salam, are saying to you there are 20 Shia. 50,000? 20. By Allah, Imam Sadiq says, by Allah, I wish there were 25 Shia, provided they truly follow our commands and they say nothing about us but truth. If we had that, we would have 25 Shia in the city of Kufa. 25 Shia in the city of Kufa. Look at the way in which Ahlulbayt alayhimus salam want us to identify ourselves and be identified. And that our strength comes from our link to Allah by priority over anything else, and our qualities of actions that we become identified with. I reiterate, no one is saying don't be identified as a Pakistani or Khoja or Iraqi or Irani or Kuwaiti or Bahraini. No one is saying don't be identified with your football team or your school or your university. But what are your primary identities and where does your strength come from? Now, I want to ask this question to lead to our conclusion, inshallah, for you and I. In the last couple of years, I can only speak about Leeds in the last couple of years. I've had the honor of visiting more often in the last couple of years, living here since the beginning of last year. I asked you a question earlier on. How would you say that the Shia community of Leeds is identified? You can see here, the Shia community of Ahlul Bayt's mindset is qualities, isn't it? That you're known through these sets of features, that you practice this way. This is what Imam wants from us. If I look at the Sikh community, for example, in London, they are most famous for feeding the homeless. Would you agree with that? There's a lot of people nodding their heads. If you speak about what the Sikh community is known for, you would say they are identified through their generosity and they're looking after the homeless. In the last couple of years, the Leeds community, the Shia community, has had big gains. It has made steps where it's identified in certain ways. Last Shahr Ramadan, when the illegal, illegitimate Zionist entity were even more attacking the Madloom Palestinians in Masjid Al-Aqsa, the communities came together to state that we stand hand in hand with the Palestinian communities. Our friends from the Jewish communities, some of them were very sympathetic, and many of them, of course, with Zionist and terrorist leanings, were very upset that we would dare stand up for a downtrodden mustada'af community. And they wanted us to revoke this. And when we stood and we talked directly with those individuals, what they learnt was that the Shia community has red lines. That it will not give up those red lines. Because those are what our deen tells us, what our maraja al-kiram have set for us. That we do not cross those red lines, whatever those red lines are, and particularly in this issue, that we do not recognize the illegitimate state, and so on. This shocked them. But it gave us that voice, that stance. Yes, we probably lost a few seats at some tables, no doubt. I mean, Rasul will tell you better than I how long he's been working on the interfaith scene in the community. Years to establish us. And in one moment, things like that can take us from certain tables. But the Shia community was identified. While other communities, other Muslim communities, would happily pander to the Zionist project, the Shia community would not. You should be proud of those stances. If you can't stand up against the Zionist entity, believe me, how will you stand up against Dajjal? If you weep over the way the Kufans could not stand up against Yazid, if you cannot stand up against the Yazids of your time, what is the difference between us and the Kufans? Sahamla. We were identified in this way. Recently, when Imam Qari asked him, may Allah bless him for the works that he sincerely provides to the Muslim community, when Imam Qari was chucked out by the government as the advisor, whether or not we say you should be the advisor to the government is a second point. When many people were abusing the Shia community, Qari Asim stood with the Shia community and said that we will not allow that abuse to reach us. And rightly in response, when he was being attacked by people, Shia and Sunni, the Shia community of Leeds together stood up and said that he was supportive of the Shia community, trying to stop the verbal abuses against the Shia community. Again, we were identified in the press, again we were identified in the community for standing with haqq. You should be proud that you did this. You should be proud that this was your identity, that people know that you will stand for haqq against batil. Yesterday, today and tomorrow. So it's not that we don't have an identity, we do. There are really positive things coming out from the Leeds Shia community. But I ask you, what else do you want to be identified with? What's the stamp that we in Leeds want to have in this part of the country? In the country, what do you want to be known for? Every year, for example, there is the Quds March. Sometimes small marches in Leeds, sometimes in Bradford and others. Who started Quds? Imam Khomeini alayhi rahmah. Where are the Shias when it comes to organizing the Quds Day March, for example? That belongs with Imam Khomeini to be able to identify with and emulate and evolve every year. Feeding the homeless, being part of the local government, making sure that we have a positive say in the media when something happens in the Muslim world that we need to have a voice on. Where is our voice? Where is our identity? This is the next area that we can grow into as a Shia community of Leeds. But so long, forgive me for saying this, so long as we think that our identity is rooted in the 313s that we put on our Twitter handle, or a big Zulfiqar that we're wearing to university, the more you vest thinking this is your identity, the more you will lose the way Ahlulbayt alayhim wassalam have told us to register our identity outside. I leave you with this question as homework. If you could have the Leeds Shia community be identified in this city with one thing, what would it be? Where should we go? What should we move into after this? Now, one of the nights I am humbly planning on doing a quiz instead of a Q&A. We'll do a quiz and a space for people to answer some questions. In that will be a question for you to answer and for you to register what you want. And it might be that 80% of you say we should go in this direction, 60% say we should go in this direction. We should be known in Leeds as a community that helps in this matter. And we can invest in that. Yesterday, I said to you, if there is someone who is a specialist in data analysis, come forward. Help us in having a census. Tonight, if there is someone here who wants to help produce a strong Shia identity, market it, curate it, present it, if you have those skill sets, if you're a specialist in marketing, come forward. Help us. Help the Leeds community be on the map, to be known for a particular strength and quality. It's upon you to be able to help our communities. As we said, on the Day of Judgment, we'll be raised together, we'll be asked about those strengths, we'll be asked about those resources that we were given. And if there are youth who have those qualities, you need to be able to stand up and help the community go forward, inshallah. On the night of Ashura, there was a companion by the name of Burayr who was known for being stern. His identity was that he was a stern, very harsh, to the point human being. Some of us are jokers. Some of us like to banter. Some of us are very stern. That's our personality. We're to the point. We're known that way. Burair was one of those. He was never known for banter and messing around. But on the night of Ashura, something changed inside him. Burair started enjoying the night. Burair started joking with all of the companions. He started teasing the companions. One of those asked him, he said, Burair, this is not you. You were always known for being so stern. Why are you acting like this now? He responds by saying, I am overjoyed with knowing that we are on the precipice of Jannah. And the only thing that stands in our way of reaching that reward with Allah tomorrow is their assault upon us. By Allah, I wish that it would come now. I wish they would attack us with their swords now, so that I am rewarded with the highest level of reward. The night of Ashura was a night of preparation, a night of ibadah. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam had asked Abu Fadil, ask the enemies for one more night. When Abu Fadil asked for that one more night, they said, Hussein's camp is afraid. Hussein's camp is scared. They want to live one more night. The Imam wanted to worship one more night. The entirety of the camp was alive with the recitation of Quran, with the recitation of dua, with the recitation of istighfar, with the recitation of Salat al-Layl. This was the identity of the camp of Hussein, to such an extent that the hadith says that 32 members of Yazid's camp defected to the camp of Hussein salamullahi alayhi, because the camp of Yazid was identified with what way? With drinking, with gambling, with joy. The camp of Yazid was identified with the recitation of Quran on the last night of their lives. 32 defected. On the night of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi sat at the door of his tent and began sharpening his sword in preparation for the day to come. He began to recite poetry to himself. He says, time, woe be upon you, fie be upon you, O time. Who can say time is their friend? Which person has not succumbed to time? At this point, he repeated his poetry 3 times. The narration says, in the tent next to him, Imam al-Sajjad is lying in a state in which he is so ill. Zainab alayhi salam is tending to Imam al-Sajjad. She hears these words. Imam al-Sajjad narrates that my auntie Zainab jumped up and ran towards Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. My brother, what words are you saying? How can you say that you will leave this world so quickly? Oh my brother, only yesterday did we lose our grandfather Rasulullah. Only yesterday did we lose our mother Fatima. Only yesterday did I lose my brother Hassan. Are you saying now your time is up as well? How will we live after you, O Aba Abdillah? The narration says that the women and children came running out of their tents, hearing the cries of Sayyidah Zainab. Sayyidah Kulthum cries out, Wa Muhammada, Wa Aliya. Woe be upon us, for Hussein is saying that he is going to depart from us in a few hours' time. The narration continues. Imam al-Hussein gathers his family members and he tells them, after me, you must give your questions, your leadership, all of your duties towards this young man, towards my son Zainul Abidin. The night continues. One narration says that Imam al-Hussein went out into the darkness of the night in order to be able to survey the battlefield present before him tomorrow.
one of his companions began to follow him because he did not want Imam al-Hussein to be attacked by the enemies. He follows him. The narration says that the companion sort of makes a sound, maybe breaking a twig or something in following Imam al-Hussein's footsteps. Imam al-Hussein turns around to say, "Who is this behind me?" The companion identifies himself. Imam takes him by the hand. He says to him, "Do you want to know where you are going to be struck down tomorrow? Do you want to know how your last moments will be?" This companion begs, "Imam, show me. I cannot wait for this moment. Show me where I am to be struck down." You can imagine in this moment, not only does this companion care for himself, he wants to know the outcome of all of the shuhada. "Oh Hussein, tell me, where is it that your beloved Akbar is going to be struck with a spear in his chest? Tell me, where is it that Abbas's arms are going to be cut off? Tell me, oh Hussein, where is it that Asghar is going to be struck in the neck with a three-pronged arrow?" You can imagine Hussein taking him by the hand, leading him towards the Qatlaha, saying to him, "This is where I will fall from my horse. There will be 300 arrows in my body. I will fall to the floor, but the arrows will strike the floor before my body hits the floor. And this is where they will kick me. This is where they will strike me on my head. This is where they will strike me on my arm. And this is where Shimr bin Joshin will commit the greatest crime in the history of humanity."
ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا